Dobro večer i dobrodošli svi na zadnje javno predavanje u ciklusu javnih predavanja, razgovora i tribina Religija i javnost, koji su se inače održavale na Filozofskom fakultetu u Rijeci, mjesečno jedanput od rujna prošle godine, od listopada prošle godine, sve sreće da nas je dvoje pa se možemo ispravljati, od listopada prošle godine, u organizaciji Filozofskog fakulteta u Rijeci i Centra za kulturu dijaloga. Budući da je ovo zadnje, onda ćemo se spomenuti svih predavanja koja su bila. Bio je Norbert Rek sa predavanjem Homoseksualnost, novi kršćanski pogled. Potom je bio razgovor između Predraga Lucića i fra Ivana Šarčevića pod naslovom Imali Bog naciju. Onda je bila Regina Art-kinu sa predavanjem Religija, žensko tijelo i pitanje pobačaja. Onda je bila tribina sa Viktorom Ivančićem i fra Drago Bojićem, vjerski i sekularni ekstremizam. I onda je u stvari su bili Hrvoje Jurić i Željko Tanjić u razgovoru pod nazivom Deva kroz dušicu igle, kršćanstvo i siromašni. Ovo je u stvari na neki način zadnje predavanje i nastavak onoga koje je bilo posljednje u nizu, dakle kršćanstvo i siromašni. U svakom slučaju, prvo bismo se htjeli zahvaliti stvarno dekanu Filozofskog fakulteta, Predragu Šustaru, čiju smo imali potpunu potporu u svakom smislu i potpunu autonomiju u osmišljavanju programa i u izboru gostiju. Također htjeli bi se zahvaliti Damiru Braliću koji je sve plakate koje smo imali napravio. I u vezi ovog gostovanja Terese Forcades, Terese Forcades, naravno zahvala Art-kinu i gradu Rijeci što nam je uletio i pomogao u jednom vrlo važnom tehničkom aspektu. Tako da sada će vam se obratiti Zoran Grozdanov koji će predstaviti večerašnju gošću.
Neću treba obraćati, nego ću samo predstaviti našu gošću. Ideja je zapravo od početka bila, kad smo počeli, željeli smo Terezu dovesti, međutim, planirali smo da neće doći. Naprosto zato što znamo koliko je zaposlena. Međutim, pokušali smo, upoznali smo je prošle godine u Šibeniku na festivalu Fališ, gdje je došla, održala odlično predavanje i ogroman interes medija je imala, tako da smo je uputili poziv i ona je došla. Teresa Forcades po mnogo čemu vrlo specifična i nesvakidašnja časna sestra. Prije svega zbog toga što je u časno ušla sa 31 godinom. A drugo, a tome ćemo razgovarati poslije s njom, zbog toga što je zaista radikalna kritičarka kapitalizma i lijeva aktivistica, što je također vrlo zanimljivo i specifično. Doktorirala je i medicinu i teologiju, tako da nije samo aktivistica, vrlo dobro zna o čemu priča i mnogi je smatraju ikonom europske ljevice i jednog od najznačajnijih teoretičarki europske ljevice danas. Sister Teresa, welcome. Thank you for coming. You flew from Dublin to Barcelona, from Barcelona to Zagreb, and you're leaving back tomorrow. Thank you for that. I know it's exhausting.
Yes.
And I know we killed you in the car with the talking. And
that was nice, actually.
And now the stage is yours. 45 minutes is yours, and then afterwards we will speak. Okay.
Thank you. Am I supposed to sit?
No?
I'll sleep then. Maybe after, I don't know, what? Maybe not. So the title of this talk is The Social Justice and Christianity in Europe Today. So yeah, from the title it's a very broad topic, so that means that necessarily I'll touch only on a few questions relating to the topic, but of course I cannot exhaustively treat everything. But the issue of social justice and Christianity, if we start thinking about what is the relationship between social justice and Christianity, the first thing that comes to mind for me is, of course, the Gospel of Matthew That's the chapter 25 of the Gospel of Matthew from 31 onwards. This is what normally is known as the Last Judgment, but the title might be a bit scary. But what we find there is an astonishing affirmation that the Gospel puts in the lips of Jesus. Jesus says, at the end of life, he's trying to convey to the disciples, to the people that are following, what it is that matters the most for God. What it is that if you want to follow this God, because there are different ideas of God, and not all of them would be in favor of what I'm talking about. But in this historical Jesus, the people that follow him and that put together his words, were trying to give us, through this parable, through this passage in Matthew 25, what it is that for God is the most important thing. What it is that a person that wants to follow God, that wants to fulfill this hope that God has for each man and each woman, what it is that should have at the forefront, at the core, at the heart of his or her doing. Well, Matthew 25 is this last judgment. People come in front of this Jesus, and Jesus does not ask, were you a member of the church? The Catholic, the Protestant, the Orthodox, or whatever church. That doesn't come in the Gospel. Also does not ask, okay, you were not a member of the church, but maybe you were doing something that today is very popular, which is to refuse the institution, the church, but to develop your own spirituality. So praying. Okay, that must be maybe the most important thing. So I don't care, would say Jesus or God, if you were official member of the church, but were you praying? No, that's also not the question. What is the question that in this last judgment is addressed? First of all, it's not a question directly. It says, Jesus, you come to the heaven, you come to the fulfillment, you come to this place that represents having done in life what it is that matters the most, and you come there because I was naked, and you clothed me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me, and I was hungry, and you gave me food. That is the link between social justice and the gospel. It's not a marginal link, it's a core, a central link. There is no way, and that the Gospel of John, the letter of John would ratify that, there is no possibility of loving God, of honoring God, of honestly following, believing in God, if you don't link that directly with how you treat, how you engage with the injustice or with the suffering, you could say with the suffering of the world, but immediately we have to link that together with justice, because you could say, oh, people are hungry because something natural happened and nobody is responsible. If that were the case, we then would link Christianity or faith in God with suffering. But if this suffering, if these people that go hungry, and I hope in my talk tonight to be able to show that these people that suffer today for social reasons, the name of this suffering is not just suffering, it's social injustice. And so the title social justice, it means that to follow this God that Jesus came to reveal, and it's contained in these passages of the gospel, there is no way you can do that if you don't pay attention to what's happening to the people that suffer. Why is it that some people suffer? Some people today have theories, like Margaret Thatcher had a theory in the 80s that she promoted, and it's called the theory of the 2/3. And she thought, she said, wouldn't it be nice to be able to rule a country to the well-being of everybody? That would be wonderful. Of course I would like that. Everybody would like that. But let me tell you, if you want to open the eyes to the reality of what it is to live together and to build a society, this is impossible. That I'm quoting Margaret Thatcher. Reality has shown that when you try to include everybody in this project of a better society, everybody loses. So you have to acknowledge that it's impossible to do that, and you have to admit that some people will be marginalized. Some people will be excluded from the society. And, of course, my understanding is that I would not accept, and I believe this is what the gospel inspires me to do, I would not accept even one person to be excluded by principle from any project of the society. But Margaret Thatcher was not talking about one person. She was also not talking about 1%. She was talking about 1/3 of the population. And this that sounded in the 80s outrageous, at least to me and many other people, isn't that close to what we are living today? I don't know exactly the numbers for Croatia. The friends in the church have given me some hints, but I know the numbers for Spain, and I know the numbers for Catalonia, my country. 30% of people are in danger of social exclusion. 23, they say now, before it was 26, it varies a little, 26, it varies a little, are unemployed. And being unemployed in the society we have means you only have, how do you call this? Like money from the state for a very short period. So it leads directly to exclusion, and if no people are not excluded, it's because the family are holding together and are the parents, the grandparents are accepting home, the sons, daughters, adult people that cannot care for themselves anymore. It's a very dramatic situation that we are living, and one that probably you've known through the newspaper, the one in Spain, in Catalonia, of course in Greece, but I think in Croatia you are also suffering from this type of society that excludes. And some people think, okay, but this is because of the crisis, right? Now we have a crisis, and what we have to do is not to concentrate in trying to change the whole system, the capitalist system, because the problem is the crisis. So let us address the reasons of the crisis. Let us try to change that. Well, let me quote to you the report of one institution that I believe in Croatia probably has the same name, Caritas. That's well known, right? It deals with the poor, is one of the most acknowledged institutions that do this type of work. In Spain, they have a foundation, a sociological foundation, that is very well known for its yearly reports, but even more known for the 7 yearly report. So every 7 years, it produces a report that summarizes the tendencies of the past cycle of 7 years. The last report of Caritas Spain was in November 2014, so a few months ago. It's very thick, it's 600 pages, a study of the poverty and exclusion in Spain on the last 7 years. The most striking item in this report for me was the following. The report said, of every 3 people in Spain that today are experiencing social exclusion, 2 of them entered the marginal space when Spain and the economy in Spain was at its best, when it was going well, when the sentence that our governors would use is España va bien, no? Spain goes well. Everything is wonderful. The GDP is growing, and all the macroeconomic indicators are best. And Spain is really showing to the world that now we can be leaders and we can be first, and we got finally, and definitively away from all these dark years of dictatorship, and that's it. So in those years of triumphalism and economic wellness, according to the main indicators, the majority of people were starting to go into this situation of exclusion. And so the problem, and this is my conclusion, but it's the conclusion of Caritas' report in itself, the problem is not the crisis. The crisis is a problem, but the main problem is not the crisis. But it is how do we organize ourselves as a society, especially in the economic aspects. So what I would like to do today is to offer you what I call my ethical critique of capitalism, and it's an ethical critique in 3 points. And if I have time at the end, to also do some theological reflections on some of the issues that I believe are at the core of what I'm going to comment. But before still to more details, because I have quoted this Gospel of Matthew, but I would like to quote also the so-called social doctrine of the Church. And this is the documents that, starting with Leo XIII, are produced by the Church that say something, affirm something that in itself is incompatible with capitalism. And what the social doctrine of the Church officially has been saying until the end of the 19th century is private property is not and cannot be an absolute right. Private property, the social doctrine of the Church, and I myself, I'm not against private property. My critique of capitalism, I don't do it to then present an alternative that it is state owns everything. I know here in Croatia you have been under communist regime, and there are different types of organizing this, and maybe some of you think that was much better, and others is the last thing they would like to see coming. So I'm not inspiring myself on those existing communist regimes to make the critique of capitalism. I am looking forward a system that brings into reality, and we have to build this system. A little bit they have started in Latin America, in Central America, when they talk about, they call it there, the Bolivarian socialism. And they call it like this because they try to bring to the fore that they are thinking of something new, socialism of the 21st century. And by this name, they mean something that can be compatible with a market economy, but the market economy is not what we understand under capitalism. When we talk about capitalism, it seems, okay, market equals capitalism. Let me give you quickly an example. I am a Benedictine. We have a rule that we live under, and it's called the Rule of Benedict. This rule, it comes from the 6th century. So that's before capitalism as a system existed. In this rule, it says, what should the nuns live off? And it never says they should just become subsidized by the state. That doesn't say. It doesn't say the nuns should receive money from anybody. It says the nuns should earn their own living, right? And should do that according to what they think is best for them to do. So one advice is that we cultivate potatoes and things, but we live in a mountain. In my case, I live in Montserrat. I don't know if some of you know where that is. It's not far from Barcelona. Very beautiful mountain, but not very good for cultivation. So we do have a little bit of garden, but that's not enough. So we have a ceramics workshop. And the ceramics workshop, in the Rule of Benedict, it says the nuns should be careful not to give the products that they are making, the artisanal work, yeah, artisan products that they make, they should be careful not to give them too cheap. That's what the rule says. You feel, what do you mean not to give them too cheap? Well, what Benedict was reasoning is, and it's a truth until today, if you live together, if you have an enterprise together, you can be more competitive than others because you can reduce costs. If you do that, then you are in an unfair, according to Benedict, unfair way, becoming competitive towards others, and you can damage others. So the nuns should engage in their own economical activity. They should not wait from the state or from the organized church or from anybody to become money. They have to earn it, and earn it through what they think is best, and nobody has to tell them from a central plan what they have to do. But they don't have to rule themselves by something that I will say in my second part of the talk is also central to capitalism. Capitalism says you should organize the economical activity so that each individual person and each enterprise tries to make the most money. That's this dogma or this idea of the maximum profit. You say it like this, maximum profit, right? This is directly contrary to all that you need to organize a society that has any chance to be just. If you allow this principle of the maximum profit to rule or to be the inspiring principle of your economical activity, that's incompatible with justice. So I'll develop that better at the end, but I wanted to just mention that at the beginning. And the last thing at the beginning is what Pope Francis said. I was in Germany 2 years ago. I was teaching theology at the university there. And there was a big controversy in the public domain in Germany because the Pope had said capitalism kills. And the newspapers had published that in first here also. Do you remember that? So capitalism kills. And of course many people came immediately to modify that sentence and to say, well, it's neoliberal capitalism that kills, but not capitalism. It's wild capitalism, as if there were another type of capitalism. It's, I don't know, certain capitalists that are doing bad business. But the sentence of the Pope was very clear. So the Süddeutsche Zeitung, that's a newspaper, very important one in the south of Germany, published a big editorial that said, the Pope makes a mistake. So it criticized. And for the first time ever, they were flooded by letters of people that said, you make a mistake. What this sentence means is exactly what we believe. And we are being, how do you say in English? Like we are just almost at the end of the patience with this type of talk about our system that tries to avoid looking into the eye and looking directly with all the peace, with all the open-mindedness, with all the readiness to build an alternative in new ways, not to just copy formulas that maybe didn't function fully, but with all the also boldness to call things by their name. So capitalism kills. It was organized then, a big event on the national TV in Germany, one of the most important debates of the TV. The Pope didn't come, but the abt Wolf, not per Wolf, is the abt primat, so the superior of all the Benedictine abbots. He was there. Also was there Oscar Lafontaine, which had been the representative for the Linke Partei in Germany, and he's a Catholic. And he said he's a Catholic that goes to Mass every day, Oscar Lafontaine. Then the representative of a small party that comes from below, and it's called the Pirates. One young people mostly. And she actually was also the partner, she was a woman, the partner of a man that had been the second one in the WikiLeaks. So she was there, and the other one was this poor editor of the Süddeutsche Zeitung that said that the textbook had made a mistake. They had a very interesting discussion, but for me, it was appalling to see how the abt, I'm a Benedictine and he is an abbot, so how the abbot actually was siding with the editor of the Süddeutsche Zeitung, and Oscar Lafontaine from the Linke Partei was with the pirate defending the Pope. So it was a bit confusing, right? So it was clear that here there are some issues that, well, it's worthy to discuss, because not everybody in the church believes that what the Pope said makes any sense. And not everybody that's outside of the church is ready to dismiss what the Pope said, but many people outside of the church believe that this is exactly what we should be saying, or have the ability to say and discuss if we want to build a better society. So I go now with this critique of capitalism in 3 points. The first point I would like to critique is ethical, I call it like this, ethical critique of capitalism, because capitalism presents itself to the world, to whomever cares to read about it or to listen about it, presents itself as the defender of freedom. And in this presentation, often comes the tension between freedom and justice, or freedom and equality. And as Margaret Thatcher or Reagan or the main proponents of this form of capitalism that we have now say, is not that they don't care about justice or they don't care about equality, but if those two, freedom and equality, cannot be fully achieved, and they assume that they cannot be fully achieved, they believe, they present capitalism as the system that it is ready to sacrifice some equality to be able to foster the maximum of personal freedom. Is that okay? No, it presents itself like this. And then sometimes the socialist or communist presents itself as the contrary, in saying, if these two, the maximum freedom, the maximum equality, cannot be achieved, we are ready to sacrifice some of the personal freedom in order to foster justice, to foster equality. I call that the fallacy, because I believe that freedom and equality or justice cannot be extricated, cannot be separated from each other. I believe there is no way we can build a just system if it is not equally able to give freedom to the people. And on the contrary, there is no way we can build a free system if it's not based on justice and equality. And to develop a little bit this, let me first give a couple of words at the theoretical level, but then right away I will give examples of the practical level. At the theory level, often we talk about freedom and we use the following sentence. Probably you will, I don't know in Croatia, but probably you will have heard that. It's my freedom finishes where yours start. Is that something that you say? Like this? Or? Yes. My freedom goes as much as it encounters yours, and then of course it has to respect you. At the first reading, it might seem reasonable, right? Because you feel, of course, you need to be acknowledged, you need to be aware that you are not alone in the world, right? So that you encounter other people, and these other people have rights, and so you respect their rights and put like a restriction on your freedom. It might sound a neutral definition, but in reality, this way of looking at freedom, it's a competitive, a territorial notion of freedom. Because if that were the case, that my freedom goes as long as it encounters yours, that my freedom has to stop when yours start, what does it have to happen to your freedom if I want to expand mine? If I want to become more free, which is something that sounds very natural, that we want to expand our freedom. If I want to be more free, for example, the gospel says that the Spirit will set you free, and it doesn't say a little bit free until you encounter the freedom of your neighbor, and you have to stop. It's like full freedom, liberation theology, God the liberator, all these notions of liberation. It doesn't allow for a limit to say, okay, you get liberated up to a point. You get free up to a point, and then you encounter your neighbor and you have to just give up your freedom. What notion is this? Territorial, competitive notion. If I want to expand my freedom, you have to curtail yours. Maybe not. Maybe you can displace yours. I widen my freedom, and then it's either you shrink your freedom or you displace it, and then somebody else will have to shrink. Am I making sense? So this competitive, territorial, rivalry-like notion of freedom is not the only notion that we have, theoretically speaking, that we have freedom. There are others, and I could now talk of the Christian others, which are, for example, St. Augustine, when he talks about freedom and love, and he talks about these two as being inseparable. That is why a very well-known and quoted sentence from Augustine is from the 5th century. It is, love and do what you want. Maybe you've heard that sentence sometimes. Do what you want is freedom, right? As we understand it, like, hey, I can do whatever I want. So Augustine says love and do what you want. Freedom and love are for him inseparable. I did my doctoral dissertation in theology about the Trinity, and those are the two notions, freedom and love. That's what the God is, that's what the Trinity is, that's what we are made to the image of. So in that sense, freedom is not something territorial that has to do with rivalry and competition. But it's not only the Christian tradition that has a theoretical way of thinking about freedom. For example, the Gospel of John also says freedom is truth, and truth is freedom. That's another setting for freedom that has nothing to do with the territorialism. But as I said, it's not only the Christian tradition, it's also a political tradition, which is the anarchist tradition. From Bakunin and all the theoreticians of anarchism, they say, I will not be free until we all are free. That's another tradition. That's very different, anthropology. If the first one, my freedom stops where yours starts, is an anthropology of competition, this one, to believe it's very different. How do I conceive of my freedom if I believe that my freedom cannot come to fulfillment without you? That I will not achieve this fullness of freedom, or better said, that I will not advance in my freedom without having you advance in yours. That's completely the contrary anthropology. This is not a competitive, this is an anthropology of, you could say, linkage or communion, to use the theological word, an anthropology of cooperation, an anthropology of empathy, an anthropology of having interrelatedness. So we are interrelated. We are not separated and competing with each other. At the deepest level, we can view ourselves, and this is a question for each of you, right? How do I understand freedom? First of all, do I think I have freedom? Many people today think, okay, don't talk to me about that. I don't believe in this, right? We just are pre-programmed and we have no possibility to be free. Maybe some of you here think like that. I don't think like this. But if you believe in freedom, then the question is, okay, what is freedom? What is freedom for me? Another person important in the political tradition has a definition of freedom that I would like to quote now, and she is Rosa Luxemburg, founder of the Communist Party in Germany, and a great thinker and philosopher as well. Rosa Luxemburg said, freedom is always the freedom of those who think differently. That's another definition of freedom, because that means that, how do I know whether I'm free? Well, it depends on my capacity to interact positively with those who think differently. Some people don't have the capacity to do that. If somebody thinks differently, they just have to exclude that person. Or if they could, or in extreme cases, so they just eliminate that person. What does it mean to have a capacity to give space in your life, in your heart, in your mind, in the society, of course, to give a space for people who think differently than you do? Well, if you do that, or in the degree that you do that, you are free. And in the degree that you don't tolerate that, you are not free. You are enslaved. You are within your inner world, unable to have a flexibility, to have a capacity to respect the other person at the deepest level. I said a little bit of theory, but now let me bring some examples that to me show very clearly why it's a fallacy, why it's untrue that capitalism and freedom come together, and why my critique is not, yes, okay, I grant this, capitalism and freedom, okay, but justice is important. No, that's not my critique. My critique is, I don't want to give up freedom, not at all. I want fullness of freedom. But let me be clear, capitalism is not a system that brings fullness of freedom. Of course, it doesn't bring justice either, but it does not bring fullness of freedom. So let's get away, I would like to get away from this false debate between freedom and justice. The debate is about freedom and justice. The debate is about whether we have freedom and justice that always go together, or we have enslavement, right? The diminution of freedom and of justice. Freedom. Well, it is true that capitalism from the beginning speaks of freedom. And it is true that it fosters freedom, but never for all. It fosters freedom from the beginning, and today it fosters freedom for a few. And the right name of this, when you foster freedom for a few and not for all, the right name for this is not freedom, is privilege. And this I agree. So capitalism is a system that fosters privilege, that gives more and more to a few the possibility to expand and to kind of appropriate even what in reality is part of the greater group, part of the greater community. From the beginning, I'll go quick because otherwise I won't finish in the time, but from the beginning only very quick, to give you this idea that also together with the freedom of capitalism comes this idea that capitalism doesn't like to regulate. Capitalism because it wants freedom, right? So people who regulate are socialists, communists, they want to tell people what they have to do, they want to put rules, and they want to put all kinds of restrictions to what people want to do, to freedom, and that's why all these things I'm talking about. But capitalists, no, capitalists want that every person can be free and do what they believe they have to do, and the state has to be kept to a minimum. That's the legend. That's how sometimes capitalism presents itself. But this does not correspond to the historical reality of this economic system at the beginning of it, in its development, and especially today. But very briefly, to go quick, at the beginning of it, do you use one expression? Probably you know this expression for the some of these early periods of capitalism were known, or are until today known, under the title of protectionism, right? You say like this, protectionism. Okay, what happens under protectionism? You have a heavy regulation of the state, and without that, let me tell you, no capitalism would have been possible without this stage of protectionism. But the protection is that you identify some industries as being of national interest. But they are not national industries, they are privately owned. They are of some people. But you say the steel or the cotton or certain industries, the iron, they are supposed to be of national interest, and then you pass some regulations that help them to develop. But this is, the state is regulating. But it's not only that. What an irony that still today in the 21st century, we still use this name protectionism to talk about the period where people like the woman that I will mention to you now, her name is Isabel, so Elizabeth. The German comes, Elizabeth 5 hours, that's her name. She's a Catalan, I am a Catalan from Catalonia. So she was a Catalan that lived in the second half of the 19th century, a syndicalist, unionist, and she was known as Elizabeth 5 hours because all her life she was fighting so that the children could work at least no more than 5 hours in the factories. That was happening because they were working at night and they were working 12 hours or more shifts. That was happening in that period where we still today use the word protectionism. To whom were we protecting under that name? How can it be that still in the 21st century we still repeat these words protectionism to describe the period of the economic history where the most of the people were at the highest unprotected. But still we call it protectionism. When whoever was protected was this very few minority. The workers, of course, did not have this maternity leave. What is this? They didn't have the insurance for the health. They didn't have any vacation, paid vacation. They didn't have any security in the workplace. They could be fired at any moment. So more or less like now we are moving towards a type of situation like this. But that was considered the normal situation. But if they wanted to organize, there were rules against this. They could be fired, they could be persecuted, they could be imprisoned if they tried to organize. So am I making myself clear with that? What I mean by the fact that regulation belongs to the development of this economic system, and it has belonged from the beginning. It's not true that capitalism, and now I will give the example for today, it's not true that capitalism has, on the one hand, the state, and on the other hand, the economic activity of the business people. It's from the beginning, it's like this. The state, and up to today, it's been activated, it's been organized, or it's been made function to serve the interest of certain business people, certain elite, or certain group of people. That, in protectionism, I think it's very clear. Let me give you the example for today. The example I give in 2009, because I believe here in Croatia also you will know about it. This is, in 2009, the pandemic for the flu happened, right? This, you called it like this, pandemic flu? In Croatia, pandemic flu. At that time, I am a physician and I am a specialist in public health, so I did a video where I explained why the scientific data about this virus and this pandemic did not fit what the health authorities, including the World Health Association, the WHO, right, WHO, at the highest level in the planet, but also the national associations and all the authorities, the local authorities, they were speaking about a very grave, very severe, very dangerous pandemic. And the scientific data did not match what they were saying. So I did a video about that and was well known for this critique at the scientific level. But what I want to do now is not to repeat this critique of the science behind the alarm for the pandemic, but I want to make a political critique of what happened in this pandemic. In this pandemic, they told us that it was very dangerous, that millions of people could die. I don't believe this, I didn't believe at that moment, and you know very well that it didn't happen. But let's assume, for the sake of the argument, that that had been true. Very serious pandemic, highest alarm, that's level 6 of the WHO alarm worldwide. At the same time, the health authorities said, we have a vaccine. Not at the beginning, if you remember, that took a few months to develop, but in autumn they were saying, we have a vaccine, and the vaccine works, so we have a huge problem, we have a solution. I didn't believe that either at that moment, and I wrote about it and many other people, but also now, for the sake of the argument, let's assume that it was true, that it was very serious pandemic, very serious infection, and it was true that the vaccine could avoid millions of people dying from the infection. Okay, now comes my critical point. In that situation, millions of people in the world about to die because of infection, and a vaccine that could save those lives, in that situation, the health authorities and the governments of the world granted to 4 pharmaceutical companies the patent of the vaccine. And those 4 pharmaceutical companies could not make up enough vaccine for all the population of the world. I remember that was very clear in Spain. I assume here also in September 2009, the newspaper said, we might not have enough vaccine for everybody. You remember that? Happened here too. Well, of course, if you have 4 pharmaceutical companies, even if they are the biggest in the world, but does it make any sense? How come in the face of the highest, or one of the highest health crises worldwide, you are not activating, as a matter of course, activating all laboratories in the world that can produce this vaccine to produce the vaccine and avoid millions of people from dying? Do you see what I'm trying to, the point? That was not done. That was not done. That's what I mean when I say whoever made that decision, it's not putting the needs of the people and the well-being of the people. And we are not talking about having a few more euros or dollars at the end of the month. That's the life of millions of people. You are putting the interests of 4 of the companies that have the highest benefits of the world. You put the benefit, the economical benefit of these 4 countries before the life of millions of people. So that happened in 2009, but this is not the end of it, because these companies, you might think, okay, if they were offered such a deal, that would be the business of the whole century, to produce vaccine for the whole population of the world. And if you remember at the beginning, they said, they will need to produce, or we will need to take twice the vaccine. You remember this? Then they said no, but at the beginning they said it will need to come in 2 doses. So imagine what that means for 4 companies. So you might think they must have given the vaccine at a very reasonable price, right? Cheaper than the normal vaccine. That's not the case. They gave the vaccine at a higher price than the normal vaccine. Who allowed them to do that? Well, how come the governments played with that? But this is not the end of it. Then they said, because we cannot produce enough vaccine for everybody, we cannot ensure that we'll be able to do that, we request that we are granted to change the formula of the vaccine. Normally, you have certain amount of antigen, and this is the little piece of the virus that needs to go into the vaccine, or the bacteria, if it were a bacteria, but this case is a virus, little piece of the virus, and then you have another part called the adjuvant, which is a chemical that irritates the immune system to make it work better. Whether that works or not is a matter of another talk, but that's the theory or the idea behind. So this company said, the antigen is what takes longer to fabricate, to produce. So we are requesting that we are allowed to change the formula of the vaccine. We call it pandemic vaccine. We'll give less antigen and more adjuvant, so less specific irritant and more non-specific chemical. And the governments allowed that, the health authorities, better said, health authorities allowed that. And then the pharmaceutical company said, but because we don't know this change, how it will affect the health of the people, now we request that the governments grant us that we will not be liable for any disease, any problem that happens if people get sick from that. This sounds like a terror story or something, but I'm at the end of it, but it's not a terror story, that happened. Except one government in the world, they all accepted this. The one government who said no is Poland. Poland, Eva Kopacz, was then the Minister of Health. And it's thanks to her that we know all this, because we are in a democracy, supposedly, and all these dealings were kept secret. We didn't know about that. I didn't know about that. I knew because Eva Kopacz, the Minister of Health of Poland, she said, when public, did it in the parliament, but then there was a video that you could see, and showed the paper and said, the pharmaceutical company, so-and-so, is trying that I sign in the name of the people this contract. I'm not going to do this. How can I do this? And relieve of all responsibility a company that's going to sell a product that's the first time that it's being produced like this and might hurt people. So thanks to her we knew, and Poland said no and didn't buy one single vaccine. Now we have all the information what happened with this vaccine. Did Poland have more infection than the other countries? No. Did it have less? Also no. So it had the same than the others. And did this vaccine cause some side effects? There are many studies that point to possible very serious side effects, but there is one acknowledged at the official level outcome of this operation. And the outcome was 800 children have an incurable disease because of that vaccine. And those 800 children have narcolepsy. Narcolepsy is a disease that you lose consciousness in a sudden way, and that can happen to you in the middle of the street, so you cannot cross the street alone because you could be in a dangerous position. You cannot swim alone. You cannot go up in the stair because you could fall immediately. But that's not only the problem. At night, these children sometimes wake up in what is known in medicine as a locked-in state. And a locked-in state means that you wake up, you have fully consciousness, but you cannot move any muscle. You cannot call your mother, you cannot do anything. That's terrifying for an adult. So imagine for a child. These children, 800. And I'm giving you the official numbers, but that's these children need to take anxiolytics, and they need to take antidepressants, and they need to be heavily medicated, and so our children that are basically, their lives have been destroyed by something that the governments of the world gave approval of, and that was an economical operation to our eyes. And the population look at this and think we are living in a system that is for freedom, and in a system that keeps the government separate from the business, and that we call capitalism. This didn't do it communist regulation, or it was not a communist regulation that did that. It was not a socialist. It was already well into what it was called the flourishing of this capitalism after the fall of the Berlin Wall, after 1989. No more this polarized world with two groups, but directly capitalism, neoliberal capitalism that was ruling supposedly with a separation between the state and regulations and the business, but in reality, in the medical field, that's the one I know the best, but in every other field, there is a heavy regulation. Capitalism has characterized itself by a heavy regulation, but a regulation that is not by chance. It's a regulation that's directed towards fostering certain interests. And another example of that is, of course, the immigration regulation. If you talk about market, one aspect of the market is the workers. And the workers, I already explained how at the beginning, and you all know, had no rights, and even there were regulations that punished the association and punished the demand for greater rights from the workers. That's regulations of the state. The police and the repressive system of the state was being used to keep quiet this part of the market. So this is a regulated market, but regulated at the lowest level, or at one level, not at the other level. And today, with the example I gave you, and I could give you many more, for example, here in Croatia, have you heard about this hepatitis C medication, vodili? Right? This is a medication that has come for hepatitis C, the viral infection, and every pill of the medication costs 700 euros. One pill of the medication. And you could say, oh, they invested a lot in producing it, so it's a lot, but what can we do? No, they didn't invest a lot in producing it. Have you heard about the report of Oxfam? Oxfam is also an international agency that has devoted itself since the Second World War to study poverty, but at the international level. And they quote that if we continue with this system we have now, in 2016, so next year, the 1% of the population will have piled up, will have accumulated more than the 99%. And those are not theoretical or symbolic numbers. If you read the Oxfam, and you'll find it very easily on the internet, you put Oxfam report and you'll find it right away, it's a literal number. They mean it. 1% more than 99%. And if you look who are these 1%, you will find represented 3 areas of economy. And those are the banking, the insurance companies, and mostly are medical insurance, not only all insurances, but the biggest part of the insurance company is the medical insurance, and the pharmaceutical companies. So here you have, as I said before, one of the companies that not earn for a living, that earn in a disproportionate way above everybody else, and you allow that these companies push a medication for an outrageous price, which is 700 euros, one single pill. It's being a problem in the United States, in Spain, and maybe also in Croatia, I don't know. The population in the prison, the imprisoned population, have a high degree of infection with hepatitis C. When you are in prison, you are entitled to be medically treated, and I think that's an appropriate thing, and I'm all in favor for that. But now, if you have to give every prisoner that has hepatitis C a pill that costs 700 euros a day, then you have to probably, these people won't have anything to eat if you don't rearrange the budget for the whole time they are in prison. It's bankrupting the budget, the social budget, because you introduce this expense that you had not planned for, and this expense is introduced because you have this type of relationship to these big businesses that you put the regulations in favor of these businesses. How are we with time? You are showing me this, huh? Okay, so now I'll have to go very quick with the other 3. All this was about this first critique. Second critique I already mentioned a little bit before this, organizing the whole economy for the maximum profit. Okay, that seems reasonable. I don't think so. I believe that people that make a business want to make a profit, of course. I said already, the monastery, we have our ceramic shop, and we want at the end of the month to have a benefit, because that's why we do it. To gain some money, to be able to buy groceries, and to just buy whatever we need. That's no problem with that. But it's very different to have profit, to just want your business to be sustainable and to make a living out of it, or to make, compared to making the maximum profit. If you allow this idea of the maximum profit to be the incentive and the core of your economical activity, you are, on the one hand, incentivizing something that it's a human possibility, which is called greed, and it's one that I believe all of us can have. But do we want to build a system that stimulates that? Do we want to build a system that actually rewards greed, or, as I said, stimulates it, fosters it? This is at the moral level, and the critique we could make at this level, but there is, of course, a practical level. If my goal is to make the highest economic profit possible, I might learn something that today is known as programmed obsolescence. Do you know this notion? Programmed obsolescence. Okay, obsolescence is a word that means that something is not working anymore. Something is obsolete, it doesn't work anymore. Programmed obsolescence is that the industrial, the person that makes something, programs that it stops working at a certain moment. For example, printers. You buy a printer, you work with the printer, you have no problems, and suddenly, poof, it doesn't work anymore. But it has not fallen, it has nothing happened, it just stopped. You take it, bring it to the dealer, and say, okay, I would like to repair the printer. Oh, it will cost you more to repair it than to buy a new one. No? Have you heard that? Yeah. This is, okay, that's absurd, because the whole carcass, well, if you hear that, you say, okay, so then keep it and give me a new one, right? Because if it will cost most. But, of course, this, what they are throwing away, is going to Africa or whatever to make piles of garbage that we are piling in this planet, because we have a wonderful economic system based on this maximum profit. What happened to this printer, and this I'm quoting a research that came out a few years ago, is that they introduced a chip in the printer that says after 100,000 pages, it stops printing. If somebody learned how to deactivate the chip, you deactivate it and it prints. Continues to print, no problem. You just have to change the ink, of course, but the printer, it doesn't stop working. That's not only the printers. How can it be that things that we make today break more easily than the ones that they did 100 years ago? It's the technique and all the progress and everything that we have gone worse, or what's happening? It's because if you are in business and you believe that the incentive has to be the maximum economic profit, if you make something so good that it lasts, if you make a fridge that lasts 60 years, well, you gain less than if you make a fridge that in 10 years you need to repair and change it. So it makes no practical sense. But there is a worse issue here. When I was explaining this thing about the maximum gain, or making my reflections about the critique in Valladolid, in Spain, somebody who came to the talk is a friend of mine who is the dean of the economics school. And the dean, when he heard me talk about the maximum profit, said, Teresa, you are outdated. I said, okay, so you are outdated, because today in the economy schools, we don't talk about the maximum profit. And I said, okay, so what do you talk about? And he said, we talk about the cost of opportunity. And this notion, cost of opportunity, and I said, but I don't believe that you are not telling people they should earn the most. He said, no, of course, we are doing that. But the problem with the maximum profit is, how do you know you have achieved it? In other words, you are a stakeholder, right? You want your CEO, the chief or the director, whatever of your business, you want to control if he or she did well at the end of the year. And you are going to ask this person to show you the numbers, right? And everybody can show numbers that show either profit or loss. If you have entered more than you have given up, so this is profit. And on the contrary, this is loss. Okay, this is easy enough, huh? But let's say you got profit. How do you know you got the maximum profit? If your goal in economic activity is to achieve the maximum profit, well, you want to quantify this. You want to know it. Because otherwise, how do you know whether the CEO has done well or not? Okay, yes, profit, but was it the maximum or not? In order to quantify this, the economic school today teaches the cost of opportunity. And what is the cost of opportunity? Any stakeholder of a capitalist enterprise today has the right to demand from the CEO that at the end of the year it demonstrates that it has made a profit for that company that is equal or superior to the profit that would have made in case that the factory of that company, instead of being in Rijeka, was in Bangladesh. That's the cost of opportunity. Bangladesh, Vietnam, or whatever country in the world has the minimum workers' rights or the minimum environmental rights. So if you go to a country, you put the factory there, and the workers have no right, no benefits, right? So that they don't get paid vacation, they don't get maternity leave, they don't get all these things that we consider that are achievements that won't be taken away from us, but they are taken away with this precariat in Europe. If you move your factory to that country, and also that country happens to be a country where you don't have to compensate for the damage done to the environment, so the minimum of workers' benefits and the minimum of environmental law, then of course you're going to produce much cheaper products. But if your clients are in Rijeka, it might not be very logical that you take your factory to Bangladesh, because then you have to take your products back to Rijeka, and maybe this will not compensate. But these numbers, today, you have to make. And if you make the numbers, and even if your clients are in Rijeka, it's economically more beneficial to bring your factory to Bangladesh, you have to bring your factory to Bangladesh. That's what the cost of opportunity means. That's outrageous. This is a system that is emphasizing, that is stimulating the worst form of competitivity. Because if Vietnam realizes that the factories are going to Bangladesh because they have less benefits for the workers, then Vietnam will try to lower the benefits for the workers to get economic activity to go to Vietnam. And it is a competition in the worst type of competition that happens here. So that's why this is my second ethical critique to capitalism, and why I'm against capitalism, because it bases the economic activity in something that actually is called greed, and we should not be stimulating in anybody. It's unpractical because it produces programmed obsolescence and piles of garbage, and it's something that it brings societies into a loop of of losing benefits for the environment, for the people, for the workers. And the last one I'll give you an example. Capitalism is an economic system in which a person can actually hire another person, and with the work of this person I might earn 1,000 euros, and I might pay that person 1 euro. That happens. That's possible in capitalism. I was called to give a talk to business people in Catalonia once, and there were 600 of them, and I said this, and nobody said, no, we don't consider that good in capitalism. If you do that, they will say, good, you're a smart capitalist person. And they will say, probably, next year, let's try to obtain 2,000 and to pay half euro and see if you can achieve this. This, I'm not making up, this 1,001, I'm taking the example from something that happened to me in 2004. In 2004, I was, as a translator, in a Benedictines meeting in Rome. It was meeting the abbots, Benedictine abbots of the world. They met in Rome, they meet every 4 years, and I was there as a translator. And one of the persons that spoke to the abbots was an ex-director of the Deutsche Bank. Why he came is because he was personal friend of this abbot that I told you was in the German program. So, not Krylov. So he was friends from school, and he had invited this man to give an update about economy to the abbots. Okay, so the man started talking, and I was translating. At a given moment, this man said, some people criticize us capitalists because they say that we are not ethical. Because they say we go to a third world country, we make a contract with somebody in that country, we take 1,000, we gain with the work of that person, we gain 1,000 euros, and we pay that person 1 euro. And some people, said he, think this is not ethical. But they are wrong, said he. They are wrong because the real question to know whether our activity is ethical or not The real question is not, how much do I gain? How much do I pay? The real question is, this person that I gave a job to, this person, before I gave the job, how much was she or he earning? If he continued, if he or she was earning 10, and because of my economical activity went down from 10 to 1, this is unethical. But if that person was dying from hunger, then it has to thank me for what I did. At that point, I was the translator, and then my tongue went, just curled, and I couldn't translate anymore. So I said, I'm only the translator, but what this man is saying is outrageous. And then the benedictine, they have not invited me anymore. But there is still... criticizing, and I'll be short, Zoran, I'm finishing. What I'm criticizing here is, of course, a Marxist critique too, in English is surplus, right? Mehr value. Surplus. That's a Marxist critique, but it's not only a critique of quantitative. So the problem is not only, okay, 1,000, everybody, most people, at least, that you will say, with your work, I'm going to earn 1,000, and to you, I'm going to pay 1. Most people say, come on, this is exploitation, right? And nobody would like to be in that position. But you could say, okay, so 501. No, that's still too much. 101, 20 and 1, 2 and 1. What is the right proportion? That would be a quantitative problem. But the critique of Marx is not only quantitative, it's qualitative. The reflection is as follows. I have said already that I'm not against private property. I'm against private property as an absolute right that allows somebody to accumulate what he or she doesn't need while somebody is dying from hunger next to that person. So I'm not against. If I were to own this glass, which belongs to the theater, if I were to own this, I think I can sell it and buy it and do all kinds of business with the glass. With my clothes, with anything that I own, I don't have a problem with the market. I have already said it in itself. But my capacity of working is not an object that I own. My capacity of working is inseparable of my dignity. Not in the sense that if you cannot work, you have no dignity. There are some people that have had an accident and cannot work, or there are some people that are born with certain conditions that make them unable to work, as we understand them. Those people have no less dignity than anybody else. But what is linked to my dignity is that my capacity of work, it doesn't matter if it is little or if it is a lot, whatever capacity I have to work, this is not an object that I own and that I can sell. And this is not separable of my dignity as a person. If I market, if I make that into an object and I buy or allow others to buy this capacity of work, I am mercantilizing, commodifying, right? I am commodifying myself. It is a commodification of the people, because the dignity of the people are not separable of their capacity of work. What is the alternative then? Well, the name collaboration, it means working together. Collaborator means that if we work together, then it doesn't mean the alternative that whoever works together has to earn, everybody has to earn the same. I live in a monastery and I recommend that to everybody in the sense that it's a wonderful thing. You work according to your capacity and you receive according to your needs. What's the problem? I don't have any problem with that. That's what I'm experiencing, but not because I don't value that. Precisely because I value that a lot and because I think this is the best way of organizing, I don't want the state to force that on anybody. I don't think this can be forced, this type. But it can be, of course, forced. I think that's what the state should do, this forbidding that this accumulation happens to the degree that other people cannot even develop. And this prepares the way for people freely, and because they want to start trying this cooperative type of ownership where people are not rewarded according to necessarily to what they work, but according to what they need. But as I said, this step I like, I live, and I recommend, but I don't want, and I don't believe it can be imposed by anybody, not the state or the church or anybody. This has to be something possible, something fostered by an economy, but something that people do out of their own free will. But, as I said, when you cooperate, it doesn't mean everybody has to earn the same. If you work 8 hours and I work 4, so you can get double and I can get the half. If you have more children and I less, we can also make an arrangement and arrange it differently. If you need more, there are many possibilities of organizing. What I'm talking about is basically this fostering these cooperatives, you call it, right? Cooperatives type of as the basic unit of production. And there are some experiences in the world about this. There are some that have worked, even within the greater economy of capitalism. There are some that have been less successful. But now I'm trying to get at the bottom of what it means to be selling your working capacity and how different it is when you, in the business that you are part of, also take part in the decision making. Also take part on the responsibility. And how important it is, and we have to move towards this society. I would like to see that, this economical organization, to the rhythm that each society allows, and we have to do it in a way that basically doesn't cost then how do you call this? Flashback, right? That it flashes back and then we go back again. But this as a horizon of the working level or the economic activity, my understanding is we have to always place in this horizon something that is not contradictory with our dignity as human beings. It cannot be that you have to live your dignity out 8 hours a day to work, and then you pick it up and try to live the rest of it as a full human being. We have to come clear with the idea that our economic activity we are entitled to and we are responsible for. And I'm not saying it's easy, but from my understanding, we cannot do less than that. To think, to try, to organize, to be responsible, to take responsibility, and to not to allow anybody, not Margaret Thatcher or not Reagan or anybody else, to tell us that this is not possible. Because this is linked with what I understand is our basic human dignity, and the theological reflections, I won't do them because we are out of time, but now the friend said that we are going to have a discussion with questions, so they might ask me, so thank you.
I think it's working. No, it's working. Thank you, Sister Teresa, for this. It's been more than an hour, but I thought it was less. People perceive Catholic Church as a very conservative institution, and even you do. But still, you are quite strong social activist and theorists. Tell me, is there any tradition within the Catholic Church that is strongly leftist that you lean upon, or you're just some kind of new product out of yourself?
First, this one, huh? So first, whether I perceive the Catholic Church as a conservative institution, this I would like to nuance, because for me the Catholic Church is basically starting with the people at the base of it, right? And the people at the base of the Catholic Church, I don't dare to quantify how many are conservatives or not, but I think they are much more plural than in the late decades have been shown by the way the bishops and the people that we call the hierarchy have been expressing themselves. We have had since Pope John the 23rd and Paul VI, these other two popes were, well, first came John Paul I that died in 3 months, and then came two popes, John Paul II and then Benedict XVI, that have been scared of certain developments, not only in the social level, and they have been conservative. So in that sense it's true. But many people at the base of the church I encounter that are in all the activist groups, in all the social justice groups that are either people that are directly Catholics or people that say, oh, I'm inspired by this or that figure. So that I would. Whether there is a current or a tradition that I can see myself in continuity with, yes, of course. I have mentioned the Gospel at the beginning, and I could mention Bishop Basil the Great in the 4th century that was organizing, but not only organizing in a charity type of way, but organizing for justice reasons and defending in a famine, the right of the people to the goods that they were, and how these goods were given not to be, how wrong it is from a theological point of view to think that the goods of the earth can be piled to the extent that other people can die from it, right? This is, by the way, very shortly, what Goldman Sachs did in the 90s. Goldman Sachs, the #1 financial institution, it made its money because in the 90s it had the brilliant idea that could not have done before. Before, I mean before the fall of the Berlin Wall, but it did because it had already, the Berlin Wall was not there. Had the brilliant idea of taking the primary foods like grain and how do you say this? Trigo? Wheat, trigo, no? Wheat, yes. Wheat that you make bread, yes. So to take wheat out of this Chicago market, right, and to the Wall Street market. So these basic goods were out of the speculative loop. So Goldman Sachs said, why can't we speculate with that? So basically, to make it short, it bought as much as possible, it piled up, it waited, it tripled the price, and then it put it back. Jan Ziegler, he is the relator for the United Nations for the Human Rights, calls this the programmed assassination of 37 million people. 37 million people have died because of that. Because of this tripling the prices has made that many countries where the people barely were making it, so couldn't make it. And this famine caused by this speculation. So back to Basil the Great, he talked in very strong terms. Also Anselm of Milan, they say basically that the one who has hunger, the extra food belongs to this person. So the property, they talk like this. So all along history have been people that have understood the gospel as a call for a fight for social justice. And more recently, in the 60s, in Latin America, it emerged a movement that's called liberation theology. And liberation theology, many people believe, because it went after Vatican II, the council, finished in 65, then it started this impulse that the council gave. It allowed for many base churches in Latin America to organize and to confront the dictatorships they were having in the 70s in Latin America and then in the 80s. And this was organizing to the point of challenging the power. And when that happened, because of these more conservative papacies, well, at the beginning, Pere Casaldaliga, he's a bishop in Brazil, and he would have been killed if it had not been Pope Paul VI that said, whoever touches this bishop touches the Pope. And then the big oligarchs in Brazil were a bit scared. But after Paul VI died, then the next Pope not only didn't say whoever touches this bishop touches the Pope, but the poor Oscar Romero, the Bishop of San Salvador, he was appalled by noticing that he had sent a letter to the Pope and the letter ended up in the CIA. And he was killed and assassinated. So, a long story. But these people exist. I was in Guatemala a few years ago, and I was also astonished to learn what I had no clue. In the 80s in Guatemala, thousands of people, Christian-based people, have been killed for opposing the dictatorship. And you go there, and the communities are very poor people, and they say, yes, hermanita, porque, yes, sister, because this is, the gospel tells us we don't have to be afraid, and we have to fight against injustice. My mother was killed, my father too, my 3 sisters, everybody. Hundreds, literally, and thousands in a very small place. A very ruthless dictatorship. There are theologians, there's known names, Gustavo Gutierrez, also John Sobrino, also Ella Curia is this Jesuit. 6 Jesuits were killed in El Salvador for this reason, and many sisters that the names we normally don't remember, but sisters of Merignac in the United States have been also organizing and fighting for that. All this movement now is a bit less after the repression, but I have been in Venezuela 4 times, also in other countries, in Peru, in Chile. The people there in Latin America believe that many of the changes of progressive governments that now are happening there were inspired by this movement. So I believe not only that it has existed, I myself, the first book of theology, I come from a family that's not religious. I was baptized as a child, but I was not taught about religion. And even when I did my first communion, I was 9 years old, the priest said, okay, you pray now the Our Father. And I said, what is this? That was the day of my first communion. So the priest should have said, okay, you don't do it, right? You don't know the basics. But of course, you know, it's a big feast and you wear this nice dress, and although I didn't, because they put me a short dress, my parents. But he didn't dare to say that. He only said, okay, I'll pray for you. And see, it worked. So, I think this only because then when I was 15 years old, in my case it was like this, when I was 15 years old, I read for the first time the Gospel, and I was astonished. I read that and I was upset. When I finished reading, I said, how come nobody has told me this? I've lost 15 years of my life. And that's how I felt. And then the first book I read in theology was by liberation theologian Leonardo Boff. The name is Jesus Liberator. So for me, this is the normal theology. Then I have learned about theologies that justify capitalism, about theologians that say that injustice, whatever, has to be acknowledged, and that. But these, for me, are deformations of the understanding of the gospel.
But what did you say, for example, there was some cynical proponent of neoliberalism who came to this lecture, listened to this and said, great, it's a great lecture, okay, we apologize for this pharmaceutical industry, it is a bad thing, it's bug in the system, or this thing with sweatshops in Bangladesh, okay. But actually I agree with you, actually, and my neoliberalism gives you space to be good Christian. Well, help the poor. I mean, get interrelated. Your talk started that you're not for subsidies from the state. He can say, great, I'm also not for the subsidies of the state. Leave the market out, and the market is free, and you help the poor. I mean, free market makes some people rich, some people poor, and you be a good Christian, good altruist, good philanthropist,
okay,
and help them.
I would say you need to listen again to the first part of my talk, when I talked about the fallacy of freedom, right? If capitalism, this neoliberal would argue in favor of freedom, because the only thing you can do, right? You say, okay, this system is helping, and why it's the best system is because it's fostering the freedom of the people. And what I tried to show in the first part is how false that is. This system does not work today, and it has never worked without impinging from the back on the state. Without trying to co-opt the state to defend those interests that are the interests that make the system work. I'll give you another example. After the fall of the Berlin Wall, in 1994, the World Trade Organization was created. You can say, wait a minute, fall of the Berlin Wall, capitalism wins, now it's all free market, right? How come World Trade Organization? What do you have to organize in the World Trade Organization? You just leave the market, right? You leave the people, just go and buy things and sell things, and the thing self-regulates, and you let the thing function like this. No, you don't do that. What's the first thing that the World Trade Organization did back in '94? The first thing went to India and forced the government in India through diplomatic pressure, because at that time the United States were backing up. What it did is force the government of India to recall a law that India had passed in 1972. And the law was, in our country, when we have a health emergency, we will allow ourselves to produce the medications that we need to curtail this emergency in a generic form, even if those medications are protected by a patent in the north. If they recall this law. Number one, you are curtailing the freedom that you are talking about. What are the patents? Why do you want patents? Patents are a regulatory measure that the pharmaceutical industry, one of the biggest of this system, could not function without. And they also get exemption from the state. So this is against these ideas of liberalism, right?
One of the pounds. But no, but I was thinking, no, because there is the other question actually following this one, which is based. So you think that actually...
But then 1 second, just to finish that, because it's very important for me, that's a key point, right, that I put at the first, because this fallacy of freedom, I insist a lot about this. The TTIP, you call it like this here, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, right?
Yeah.
this is being pushed, and this is the brother, the sister, the companion of another one, multilateral agreement, investment. So this is nothing new, right? This is the direction this capitalist economy has been going for many years. And this TTIP is exactly the highest example of what I'm talking about, is to tie the hands of the state, but to tie them in a way that it defends its interests. So it's not tying them in the sense you don't touch anything and let everything work in the market and don't intervene with this. But it is, you are going to be bound by certain clauses to defend my interests. So the market should allow, the freedom should allow, if some people organize and just do something that goes against your interests, too bad. You organize and do something that tries to compensate. But no, you want a law that says you cannot do that. This will be banned, this will be persecuted. And if I do it, you won't. For example, the immigration, the rules for immigration are tightened, are worsening. If you have all this capital, globalization moving, the people should be moving also. To follow this and to get a chance to compensate or to have the offer and the demand and all. No, it's on the contrary. You are putting more regulation, you are avoiding people to reunite with the family, and those are rules. And these rules are not by chance. That's what I'm trying to say. These rules are thought out in, for example, this TTIP includes a clause where this business will be checking out the legislation that comes from the European Parliament before this legislation is approved, to see if it's tailored or not to their benefits. So that's what I wanted to, I could give more examples, but I don't want to. But this point is for me the main point that I would answer somebody that comes saying, oh, that's what's the problem. It's like it's false. It's not an honest system. If you come and say liberalism at Margaret Thatcher, right? It's a system that's going to leave all these people out, but I'm sorry, it's the best that we have. I don't like this. But
but actually the question was, well, why don't you organize and help these people? I mean, you have all these charities. I mean, we give you space for altruism, for your philanthropy, for your solidarity, for your Christianity, actually to work. I mean, give the people food, give them money to go to the hospital, help to the immigrants, leave the state out.
Well, in my also intervention, I try to make the point how you are appropriating something that doesn't belong to you. From a theological point of view, is that as if you say, okay, I'm getting all this from you, right? I'm taking from you, I'm leaving you naked. Then say, okay, I'm going to give her the opportunity to clothe you. It's like, okay, thank you, but you know what? This is my clothes, so you're giving that to me. It's that simple at that level, right? That's the world imperative, right? That's the.
When we were driving in the car from Zagreb to Rijeka, at one point you said we need...
great velocity.
At one point you said we need revolution. Is revolution something that is possible? Because we see all around Europe, Podemos is doing good in Spain, Syriza won the elections in Greece, and the poorest country after them is Croatia in EU, and we don't have anything like that, basically nothing.
So why do I talk about revolution is because to contrast that with reform, right? To think what we need is a reform of the present system so that it becomes more humane or it avoids these extreme things. Well, I don't think it's reformable because I think the flaws are fundamental. It's based on some things that are either contradictory, the freedom thing, or plain wrong, the greed. Right? Or the last one, the overlooking of the dignity of the people. So plain wrong or contradictory, that's no good foundation. So in that sense, I use revolution. I'm not an advocate of violence. I think it's obvious, but I say it to make it clear in any form. And I don't think that radical change of the system can happen without violence, but I'm not going to produce any violence. But I'm talking like this so that you also get the sense that I'm taking seriously what that in the realistic level means. So I don't think that all these interests that we are talking about, you can challenge them peacefully, democratically, and nothing happens. But I'm all for challenging them. I'm not for challenging them in a violent way at all. And if we do it, and we do it only in one country, well, probably things won't go very well, right? But why should we do it only in one country, right? We could now, because of this Greece thing, Croatia maybe, in Spain, Catalonia, if it becomes independent, could be part of a movement that, if we gather some momentum at more international level, then the thing will have some opportunity to succeed. If we keep it in one country, I think this is not possible, more than testimonial, and right, we have to be motivated to do that as well. Huh? But so revolution, I use it in this way, and I consider that, as I said, a possibility if we unite.
But when we are speaking now just about international revolution, yes, and revolution in one country, then we can also open another topic that you didn't talk about, but you are very involved in Catalan independence, yes, in secession of, yes, Catalonia. So actually, the thing is, somehow the project of the EU was the idea behind it. It became the product because of free economy and everything, but the project was invented somehow to diminish the European nationalities that caused many bad things and wars and everything. So actually, your movement is pretty nationalistic in a way of making Catalonia independent. So how it goes, this nationalism with your left attitude?
Okay, so here I would like, or I need to immediately distinguish from, and this seems very simple said like this, but I'll explain it, this good nationalism and bad nationalism. So I don't advocate nationalism in general as a good concept by itself, because I am aware of what's called exclusivistic or exclusionary, right? Chauvinistic, exclusionary. So nationalism understood as this we as according to blood lines, according to separating the people, according to what's your last name and what's your pedigree and who were your grandparents and great-grandparents and everything, and trying to defend some kind of a specificity for this group that doesn't belong to others, or to try to think that we are better than the others. That would be chauvinism. All this I want nothing to do with, right? So what is for me nationalism? For me nationalism is to have a political project that unites us in a specific way, in a specific land, and often with a language and a culture that is mixed, because languages and cultures are not pure, thanks God, and they are evolving, and I don't want to keep them in a box and take the dust out of them every day and just keep them as a treasure. I love my language. It's a language, I believe, you know, let me just short, but in the book of Genesis, in chapter 11, it comes a story, that's the story of the Babel Tower. And the story of the Babel Tower is very interesting because it says, we had, at that time, the whole world was united, they all spoke the same language, and they all were working for a same goal, that was to build a tower that reached the heaven. And God looked down and said, I don't like this. And everybody was united, they were all working for one thing, and they were all speaking the same language. And so God said, I don't like this, I know what I'm going to do. And he sent, and the text, if you read it when you get home, it says exactly that. God sent the linguistic diversity. And then they started fighting with each other. That's what the text says, so you feel that's a terrorist God. Huh? So it's just undermining the unity of humanity. What's wrong here? Okay, you can interpret that, you know, the Bible can be interpreted in different ways, but how do I interpret this is actually, like Christer Stendhal, he was the dean of the Harvard Theological School and a very good Bible theologian or biblical theologian, and he interpreted that in the following way. It's not conceivable that this God of the Bible is a terrorist God really, or against what is good for humanity. But what this God is not and will never be is an imperialistic God. This unity that was described in Genesis 11 is the unity of uniformity that has nothing to do with the unity in communion of the Trinity. We need unity in diversity. Diversity is an essential part of unity, understood as God understands, as communion. That's the Trinity, my big topic, right? So what it means is that this type of project where everybody speaks one language, everybody has one goal, and everybody goes marching in one direction, that's what armies do. And that's what empires do. And this is what globalization has the danger of doing unless we create, defend, and are able to preserve in the best way, not conservative and taking the dust, but in an active, dynamic, mixing way, but preserving this diversity. I'm appalled when I enter to some web pages that talk about biodiversity, some of them from conservationist movements and ecologist movements. You read there and they say, okay, by the time you were reading this text, 1,000 species have been lost in the world. They are like, you become shocked, right? Because it's like, maybe they are species of mosquitoes in a cavern, something that it's not relevant. But I'm scared by that because as a physician, I know how this genetic diversity is basically the treasure of innovation in biology and of future. So what I believe at the biological level, I believe also at the cultural level. We have now 5,000 languages. I don't remember the numbers. I read not a long time ago. 95% of the languages of the world in 100 years will have disappeared. That's horrible. That's a shrinking of the human, because every language, I don't believe some languages are better than others. I mean, it's clear some have more vocabulary and more interesting or complex, but I'm not into comparing them better and worse. But each language means that some people, maybe for thousands of years, have the language has somehow captured some of the human experience of these people. And that's why the language of the Eskimos has 15 words for white, right? And the ones in the jungle have 300 words for green and these kind of things. So many people have fought each other, have loved each other, have insulted each other, and have respected each other in those words, and have passed them to you, right? So I became an inheritor of this tradition that I don't want, as I said, to fossilize or fetishize or something, but I'm responsible for that. And if I, with my activity and also at the political level, let that's lost, and then we end up speaking all English, like now we are doing, or speaking all Chinese, or I don't know what, this will be a great impoverishment of the world. So my idea of nationalism, or why I foster this independence, is because I believe, well, just briefly, but you know, in the Ayurvedic medicine, that's the medical tradition of India, they talk about these 7 chakras, which are 7 spots in the body that concentrate especially the energy and the coordination of the body, and that modern medicine is very interesting to identify these 7 chakras with the 7 hormone glands that regulate the body, right? So of those chakras in this ancient form of medicine, the first one is the tribal one. It's the one that corresponds to this idea of needing a tribe, a place to be. That's very dangerous, right? That's exactly what you were talking about. We want to avoid in Europe, and here you have, you know very well, right? What that can be, this type of fighting and closing communities and expelling the others and ethnical cleansing and all these things, right? So this is, of course, in itself nothing positive. But this, according to this ancient medicine, only when the person is flourishing as such, is when each of these chakras is connecting to the one that's above. So what I'm trying to say by that, this one will be connecting with the number 7, the 1, the 2 with the number 6 is this intuition or third eye, and then the 4th, which is the one in the middle, the heart is the one that goes along, the 3rd was with the 5th. So this one is, you have to be rooted as a person. So you have to be open that the maximum, the number 7 is the spirituality at its universalist. So of course I conceive of a human being as somebody that treats every other human being as an equal. Of course I cannot think otherwise. So that this tribalism is contrary to that. But tribalism, we mean aggressiveness with this fostering of one identity. I don't like identitary nationalism. I don't like identitary independence. It makes no sense to me. But I like, and I acknowledge that I love these hills of Catalonia more than any others. Because that's where I was born, and this love, I think it's not to be dismissed. And it's good to take into account, and it's good to make place for it in a non-exclusionary way, in a non-chauvinistic, non-identitarian, and it's good to help people to have common projects that are not along family lines, that are along political will. So if these people in Catalonia have a political will to build something together, I think that's an enrichment not only for us, but for the world. And this is something that we build together, you are invited to come. Anybody, that's all I
Mi smo tu gotovi. sad je red na vama. Razgovaramo na engleskom, nažalost, moram se ispričati zaista. Bilo je plan da ona dostavi predavanje prije, da mi to prevedemo, ko ne razumije neka ima pred sobom ili da imamo titlove gore. Međutim, željela je iz bilježaka govoriti, a simultani prijevod je preskupa, sumnjam da bi neke korporacije donirale iz Hrvatske simultane prijevode. Tako da, ako želite postaviti pitanje, tu kruže sa ovim mikrofonima. Ne znate engleski, postavite pitanje na hrvatskom, mi ćemo je prevesti, tako da, a nadam se da ćete razumjeti odgovor. Evo, tamo je neko.
I guess it is, oh, it works, okay. So, you spoke a lot about systems in economy. And there is one thing I'm puzzled about. There have been many systems since the dawn of humankind. Lots of philosophers spoke about them. There is the state of Plato, there is De Civitate Dei from St. Augustine. I mean, there has been a lot of things, really. However, every system has one potential flaw, regardless of how perfect it might be, and that is the humankind. I mean, you could come up with a great system, and the selfish human could corrupt it. I guess we can all agree on that. So, while I agree with you when it comes to modern system, I mean, capitalistic, it has many flaws. I mean, I studied economics, and yeah, I agree, like exploitation of man and stuff like that. However, there is a problem. Well, I mean, you could come up with another great system, but when it comes to current one, there is a word. There is something called invisible hand. It is a term coined by what's the name?
Adam Smith.
Yeah, exactly. So, thing is, he counted on human greed. And I believe that every system that doesn't include weakness of man is just as flawed. I mean, you could come up with, you spoke about it, you could come with arrangement, someone makes more, someone needs more, you distribute it equally. But what do you do with people that don't want to share? I mean, you cannot force them, since in that case you are diminishing their freedom. You spoke about it earlier. So how do you handle things that are based on the human, that are flawed? I mean, we can even see it from a theological point of view. We have...
Točno pitanje.
Exactly. Question is, what to do with men?
Yes.
Even with perfect system, what do we do with men?
Okay, thanks. Well, I would like to say first something about this invisible hand, that how Adam Smith explained and talked about it is very different from what in the neoliberal economy is actually being used, this expression, that is the market on itself kind of compensates on its own. But let me just point again, because the fallacy is main point, right? My main point of the critique is not to take the arguments for granted, because it's like, wait a second, what you are telling me, this corresponds to reality, yes or no? And here, the invisible hand, can you explain to me where this invisible hand comes when? In the European Union, that's what happened in Spain. We supposedly needed to rescue the banks, right? We didn't do like in Iceland, that they said, no thanks, we don't rescue them, and oh, you go crashing, and they didn't go crashing, and they don't have debt, we have debt, right? They did the right thing, to my understanding, we did wrong. We accepted that, our government, people who rule accepted that, but now comes the thing. This money comes from the European Central Bank. But the European Central Bank, the European Union, is organized in such a way, well, first of all, let me tell you the numbers. The debt in Spain was 19% debt was public debt. 81% was private debt. This 19% public debt was below the European median. So when you hear that in Spain the people just earned or spent more than they had, or in Greece, but I don't know the exact numbers for Greece, but in Spain I can give you the right numbers. This is not true. It doesn't correspond to reality. 19% were private, public, 81% private. Of this private debt,
Of course, some of it was of people that just bought something in installments, right? So that's of course part of the debt if you have a mortgage. But more than 90% of the private debt was from banks and big corporations. The state decided that this debt now it will be into the public sphere. And we needed then money to pay for that. This money comes from the European Central Bank. But the European Union has a regulation that says the money cannot come directly from the European Central Bank to the country that needs the money. Even though this money is of course money that came from the country, so from each person, because from where else does the bank get the money? It cannot do that. It needs to go first to a banking intermediate institution. And you could think, okay, so it just makes a detour, but basically it ends up where it should. No, there is a difference. When the money goes from the European Central Bank to the intermediate financing institution, the interest rate is 1%. And when it goes from the intermediate banking institution to the state that has problems, the interest rate is 6%. So in the very rescue mechanism of a European Union that is having an alarm at the social level, it's similar to what I have explained about the pharmaceutical companies. So this is not an isolated example. That's how it works. That's why it's the system what's corrupt and not the people, some of the people, but also it's true. So in the very system that's supposed to be rescuing the people in need, you build in a mechanism for transferring money from these people directly to the richest institution. This is what my first thing to say. The Adam Smith, we could discuss at the economical level what exactly meant Adam Smith when he talked about it, but the truth is that it is outrageous to invocate or talk about the invisible hand when you institute mechanisms that are redistributing the wealth at greater speed and in the wrong direction. Right? So that's what we have. That's how I understand, and I can give many more examples of that. How taxation, I don't know how it is in your country, but in my country is upside down. The people, the more you have, the less you contribute to the tax. And even if you have big business, you can contribute nothing, because then Jean-Claude Juncker, who is now the president of Europe, will give you a tax break in Luxembourg, and then you can contribute anything. And then he'll be the president of the European Union. What is this joke? I mean, it seems, I don't want to reason like quick or not in a peaceful manner, but it comes a point where this is like an irony. It's really a splash on the face or something. It's too much, right? These inbuilt mechanisms. But wait a second. In the United States, these banks that needed to be rescued, too big to fall, they call them, got the money from the public, and then when they started making benefits, it gave back the money to the people, right? And in Europe, I don't know if have you rescued banks in Croatia? Have you? Okay, are they giving back the money? So what? Who decided that? One second, I'll get to that. Who decided that? Is that the invisible hand? Okay, so that's the point, right? That's not the invisible hand. Somebody's there making decisions. So somebody's, okay, in that sense, maybe we'll correct Adam Smith. But just to be aware that somebody is making decisions. But for example, another example, because this is not a minor thing, I don't know how you call it, the IVA in Spain, this is the tax on, yeah? So if you're making any type of, well, you're selling in this case, or also the IRPF, any economic activity has a taxation, right? No, not any, except one. The speculation, banking speculation, that has no taxation. The invisible hand side. Okay, that's also a good point. So this is also to be included, because of course this privilege also, in the sense that the church participates of any privilege, I also speak against that. And I think it's not only not good for the rest of society that any church or any religious group gets exempted from taxes that the others have to pay, but it is also not good for the gospel. I cannot come here and preach this freedom, this love, this meaning that, according to my experience, has God, if I have them behind these type of situations. So the church supposedly have already, the Catholic Church, spoken against, but in the practice in Spain, and from what you are telling me, maybe also in Croatia, is not separating from the state as it should. Is that what you are saying? Okay, so this thing with the taxation, you know that the Tobin tax, famous Tobin tax, that's an economist that won the Nobel Prize and was suggesting that we could taxate this financial speculation with 1%. But the IVA is 21%. And then the European Union, the European Council discussed 3 years ago whether they would introduce a 0.01% tax. And they decided against that. So that's the situation. And the money that this financial speculation is moving is, and the comparison is much more, without comparison, than all the productive activity. Because here, also very briefly, but to make more clear this criticism of the economical system, you know how it happens today. It is that the banks, when you go and get a loan, if I now give you, like, you come and say, okay, can you give me 30 euros, right? I give you 30 euros, and then in my accounting, my inner accounting, I write minus 30, right? I have minus 30 because until you give me back the 30, I'm minus in my balance, right? Missing 30 euros, that's very logical. The banks don't do like this. Today the banks do. Somebody comes and gets the 30 euros from you, or the 300,000 euros from you, and what you write in your account is that you generated 1 million euros, because you're going to get that with the interests that you don't have and have not become yet, but you write, you are creating money, creating value out of debt. This is how it's working today. And that's why people can say there are circulating in the world 3 times more than everything, all the wealth of the world. But this is impossible, that's inviable. How are you ever going to? So the debt is today, in this financialization time, the debt is the motor of the economic system. And the debt means that we are moving and speculating with something that in itself, it's empty, it's virtual, it's not real. So this is another issue that we could criticize, but just very briefly to address the last part that you said, what about the people? I didn't explain all the other aspects that are important when we talk about these issues, but I often quote this Trotskyist notion of permanent revolution to be into very clear that for me there is no system that we can construct and then just go to rest. And we now have the right system, and now we can trust things will go well. No, I believe that if we really want democracy, if we really want justice, social justice, that's the title of this talk, then we have to be ready to participate in that, counterbalancing whatever power we put in place. If it is a power that's organized differently, if it is a non-capitalist, but it will be some people will be delegated to do certain jobs. And these people we have to watch out, and we have to establish checks and balances, because yes, you are right, this capacity for corruption, I acknowledge, and I want to take it into account. But that is not a reason enough for me to justify, to defend, or to accept a system that it is well beyond, well and contradictory, as I have said, and with all these examples I'm giving, is not acceptable for me that we cannot do better. We cannot do paradise on earth, I don't think. We cannot do ideal system, I agree with that. But can we do better than what I'm explaining? I'm sure about that.
Moći ćemo čuti u 10 idemo na televiziju, večeras gostuje u Otvorenom sa veselim društvom, gdje bit će Stjepo Bartolica i Žarko Puhovski u Zagrebu, tako da ćete moći čuti još. Ima li još koje pitanje? Film je poslije ovoga, tako da...
Imam ja jedno pitanje. I respect your work, Teresa.
We don't see you. Sorry.
Where are you? Up?
I respect your work, but we are Christians. We are not afraid of capitalists. We believe that capitalism and private property is the measure of that man, and that there will come time that we can lower corruption in pharmaceutic industry, in this industry, in that industry. We are not afraid of capitalism. We believe in responsibility, which we can get from capitalism versus communism.
Može samo molim vas pitanje? Da ljudi čekaju. Recite pitanje.
My question, I'm afraid that I'm socialist as you are, and I work as you are, that's why I respect your work.
What is the question, please?
No question. But why don't you think we cannot renew capitalism, for example? Or why don't you believe that capitalism, that we can see corruption in capitalism better than communism?
I'm sorry, but can you please formulate the question?
I got the question. And so why do I think that we cannot reshape capitalism? Well, I'm not into language, so are you in agreement that we don't want a system that is based and fosters this maximum profit, as I have explained? If you are in agreement with that, I don't care how we call it, but let's change that. Are you in agreement that the basic working capacity of a person cannot be commodified and sold, because this equates selling the dignity of that person, and that somebody cannot get 1,000 euros and just pay one to the other one, and that not only out of your goodwill, but fundamentally we want a system that doesn't allow that? So if you are in agreement with that, then go ahead and let's forget about the name.
No, I'm afraid of
Ne, hvala.
people who
Ne, nećemo. Da čujemo još pitanje ko ima.
Hi there.
And then
So,
one, just,
I
sorry.
will be really short. So basically,
Just one, sorry, I think very briefly, just one thing, because the prior question came this word about responsibility, because it's another of the fallacies of capitalism. Freedom belongs to it, responsibility belongs to it. I have given some, I think, very clear examples why I don't believe it's the case, but let me give you a last one very shortly. This is today, sorry, shortly. This is today. I recommend like a documentary that you can find on internet, which is called The Deutsche Banker, or the Dutch Banker. And it's a real banker that actually has talks about his experience as a big banker in Germany. And what he says is that basically the stock exchange nowadays, for 2 years ago, the stock exchange had a medium time of having the stock actions that you buy and then sell, because that's basically the type of activity. The medium time 2 years ago was 4 hours. So of all the changes in the stock market, only 4 hours the stocks were remaining in your hands before you sold them again. And can you imagine at a global level what that means? But he said, nowadays, the medium time is 22 seconds. Nowadays, how can we talk about responsibility? Machines do that. It's real. So people cannot do that. You cannot in 22 seconds buy something and sell it. It's impossible. So 22 seconds, but this is the stock market. This is the main asset, the central backbone of our economy today, the capitalist economy, this financiarization, this called, or some people call it casino economy, right? That's why they call it like this. But human beings don't do it. I was once in a monastery, Benedictine monastery in California, where I met a man that he was meditating and he was a stock changer. And he had 18 screens in the monastic cell. He was not a monk, he was living there at the monastery as a guest. And he showed me, and he had 18 screens, and he would sit there, and then see all the different lines going up and down, and then just make decisions like that. And that was his job, but that was 15 years ago. Persons cannot do that anymore. 22 seconds, the medium, so sometimes it's even quicker. Big machines do that, and that brings a country down, a business down, but a country down completely. This is the responsible system that we have.
Imamo gore pitanja.
Ljudi samo da dignu ruke da ih uoče, ljudi sa mikrofonom.
Imamo još doslovno 2 pitanja, tako da to je malo problem.
okay, so basically, just a quick comment. This is a secular state, and we are not all Catholics. There are here agnostics, atheists, humanists, so please. The question was, you said, you quoted the Pope, he said, capitalism kills. So my question is, or a comment, nationalism kills. This is the true kills. So religion kills. Lots of things kills. But also you said something about Veda medicine. This is actually pseudoscience. It's not true. So you should read a little bit of that. So my question is, are you aware that the large amount of sorry, I'm nervous. Can I speak in Croatian?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So, da li ste svjesni da najviše nekretnina u Hrvatskoj upravo crkva posjeduje?
Okay, thank you.
Da. I ja bih vam predložio možda da crkva proda svoje i tako nahrani gladne ljude, ne?
Možemo odmah uzeti drugo pitanje. Take another question also. Can you take one more question? Is it okay?
Gore čeka neko. Sa mikrofonom, da.
Hello? So my question is, do you think that by modifying our... Do you hear me?
Just try a bit louder.
Do you think by modifying our current formal education system we could lessen the financial greed of future generations? And if yes, how?
Oh, can you repeat, please, because we were looking for you.
Can you say again?
Can you repeat?
Do you think that by modifying our current formal education system we could lessen the financial greed of future generations? If yes, how?
Okay. So to the first question, there were different parts. One is this part that I said that the Pope said capitalism kills, or religion kills, and the point that I was trying to make in my lecture is that capitalism kills inherently, so it cannot not kill. And that I could also quote Rosa Luxemburg again when she was aware that this exploitation, ruthless exploitation, it's part of the capitalist system. And I think the history, if you want to read it, it shows like that, because when we in the 80s in Spain, that's when I studied, I could study my whole medicine in a very good state university. I had all healthcare without having to pay directly for it. Of course, it was paid through the budget of the state. And I think I had a very reasonable circumstances or conditions of life. But at that time, in Latin America, had the worst dictatorships. And this is not by chance. The United States, one of the backbones of this dollar economy that we have, cannot sustain its economy without the weapons market. In Spain, we could not sustain our economy without the weapons market. What does it mean to have a weapons market? What are these people interested in? And how does it affect other countries? So I am completely sure, and I back up the Pope in that, and of course many others have said it before him, that capitalism in itself, and by its own definition, kills, and it's based on exploitation and killing. I don't believe that religion is that the case, but of course I acknowledge that religion has killed, that religion wars have existed, and that there is a potential in religion for killing. Like there is, you could say, a potential in intimate relationships to become violent. That's true too. And it's very important. It's not a minor thing. You can violate, like rape. You can rape, and you can beat, and you can do all kind of horrible things, and they are to be denounced, and they are to be open, and they are to be exposed, and laws have to be persecuting that. But I don't believe intimate relationships are inherently evil, are inherently violent. I believe intimate relationships can be a beautiful thing. I believe religion can be a beautiful thing, and in the history there are many examples of beautiful intimate relationships, of beautiful religious attitudes and people. But I don't think in the history there are any examples of beautiful capitalism. Was the second one? The religion. And then about religion owning here in Croatia, I don't know the details in Croatia, but I already said that to me, privileging the church, the Catholic on any other, this is not right on basic justice issues, and also because of whoever believes that this church and this faith and this Jesus has something to tell the world. This is the worst situation you can have to be able to speak about love and freedom and justice. The worst situation is to have this love and freedom and justice associated to the punishment of the state or to the privileges of the state. So I'm against this, and I'm all in favor that we abandon the state of the Vatican and all that we need to abandon to be naked only with the gospel. about education, of course, education is a fundamental tenet, a fundamental aspect of this revolution. And revolution is not only changing the economic system. The bishop that we have in my diocese, when I started together with an economist, this movement we call constituent process, I went to see him and he said, Teresa, I don't think that you changing the structures without changing the heart, it doesn't allow to anything. So he believed, this bishop, that you have to change the heart, and you could say education can help of that. And then my answer was, okay, I also believe that if you change the structures but you don't change the heart, you will come up with a new corruption in the new system. But you know what? Let's do both at the same time. So,
hvala vam. Evo 2 sata je prošlo. Moramo... I thanked you like 10 times today, yesterday, and last week when I was buzzing you with all the interviews and everything else. But really thank you, because this meeting means a lot to us. And especially since we don't have an opportunity to hear from the member of the church, one strong and really applicable social story. And we invited you basically because of that connection of Christianity with social issues, because all our series is about religion in the public space. Vama hvala što ste došli. Ostali bi, moramo se požuriti, u 10 mora biti na televiziji, mora još nešto i pojesti. Uglavnom, hvala vam lijepo.